right, hello and welcome to another Expert Inside interview. My name is John Golden from Sales Pop, online sales magazine, and Pipeliner CRM, joining you as usual from a sunny San Diego. And today I'm delighted to be joined from Los Angeles by Frumi Barr. How you doing, Frumi?
I'm doing fine. Maybe I should put my glasses on too, so we both look smart.
Yeah. I know they don't really work for me. They don't make me look any smarter. But anyway, and Frumi is the founder of Barr Business School. Is an expert in scaling businesses. She leads CEOs through growth with a focus on communication, alignment, and accountability, and has spent over 20 years blending practical leadership with academic knowledge. She's also the celebrated author of A CEO's Secret Weapon, a top-ranked business book that actually forwarded by Simon Sinek. And we're going to talk about today is how to retain and engage employees. Okay.
Oh, that sounds like a good thing to talk about, doesn't it?
Yeah. Rumi, let's get into this, right? Retaining and motivating and attracting employees. It's a very different. It's a very different thing nowadays, given that the nature of work has changed. So we have some people who still work in offices, some people who work hybrid, sometimes in offices, sometimes not. Some people are totally virtual. Some people are globally dispersed. So now you have people in lots of different situations, culturally from all over the place. And yet at the same time, the organization has to figure out how to get all of these people motivated and working well together. So how do you do that?
Well, I had the pleasure of working with a remote team, and there were 8 of us. And the way we did that, we were really very intentional. We started every single meeting with a review of our values. So there were 8 of us. We happened to have 8 values, so worked kind of nicely. And what we did was everybody shared a value and what it meant and whether or not that was the value that they lived up to that week. Mm-hmm. And if you were late to a meeting, guess what? You had to share all 8 of the values. So, of course, everybody had them on their desktop, etc. But, that really brings them to life, because it's one thing to know what your company values are. Like with that particular company, I'm a co-founder of a pet technology company, and the company's called Scholar. And for that company, our number one value was family first,
right?
Human and furry. Right. And what that meant was, if my dog, let's say, was having an episode or something, I would be able to say to the team, I gotta go, Enzo needs me. And no one would criticize me. And you know that in some companies, if you say you need to go to your grandmother's funeral, they give you like 3 hours off. And that's not cool, right?
or they say, well, how close were you to your grandmother, really?
How many grandmothers do you have?
You've another one. Come on. But no, I agree, and I think that's what I think the word that you mentioned there is the intentional part, because a lot of companies will say, oh yes, we have values, and they maybe have their values and they have their mission and their vision statements, they have all of these things, but they're just bumper stickers at the end of the day. They don't really mean anything. I think that's the key there, is the intentionality around it. And I think recognizing that we do live in a world where there's so many different generations and people are dispersed, and that you have to be intentional, because if you just leave it to organic, it's going to be a mess.
And we also want to, when we get into a meeting, it's like we want to dive right in. You don't always want or think about the warm and fuzzies that maybe should come first, especially for some people. And so another thing to do that I like to start a meeting off with is give me a highlight. Give me a rose, a bud, or a thorn. So a rose is that wonderful thing that happened, whether it's personal or business. A bud is something hopeful, a new lead that you're excited about. And obviously a thorn is a challenge. And if everyone shares either, not all 3, but just a rose, a bud, or a thorn, you really get to know them. And that's what's key, because you're not hanging around the water cooler anymore. So how do we create that collaboration, that how would you say it? Collegiality?
Yeah, or collegial.
Collegiality? Yes. How do you create that if you're not in person? So you have to work at it. And then you can get into the business of the meeting. And meetings don't have to be an hour. They could be 25 minutes and very productive. But
Yeah.
having some kind of framework, I think, really helps when you're trying to
Yeah.
make that engagement.
And I think that's the other thing. I think as you said, I mean, meetings don't need to be an hour. They can be 15 minutes. They can be 20 minutes. I don't know why people, seem to think that you can only have a 30-minute or an hour long meeting. That there's no other configuration possible. And I think, that's part of it as well. But like you said, I mean, it's that idea of being intentional, then being organized and making sure that people don't feel like, well, I'm a little bit outside the loop because maybe I'm in a time zone that's awkward for everybody else.
Right. Something I found fascinating recently, I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about how since the pandemic, it's almost like people have forgotten how to behave in the workplace. So we actually created a workplace etiquette course for the school. And it's things like you go out to dinner. Have you ever been out to dinner, John, when someone says, "Oh, you're paying, I think I'll have a steak"?
Indeed.
Well, do you think that's great business etiquette?
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
But they don't know that. How do
Mhm.
people know? So business etiquette isn't just about, or when you go out for dinner, for example, it's not about knowing which fork to use.
Mhm.
It's really about the conversations to have, how you treat the waiter.
Mhm.
So I had a little fun with this particular course because it's everything from how you behave with different cultures to how you behave in the office when it is hybrid. You started off by talking about all these different situations. Well, not everybody is comfortable going back to the office.
Yeah.
And how do they behave? Do they hang over your cubicle when you're talking on the phone?
Right. No, I think people. I think you're right. I think people have. There's a lot of behaviors that have changed, and not for the better either. Uh, Over the last while since the pandemic, as we've discussed before as well. But no, I think that's a huge thing. I think people have forgotten or perhaps never learned properly, how to interact properly. And now, especially as you say, interacting in different ways. I had a fantastic head of sales who worked for me one time, and she used to do exactly what you're talking about, but bring in a new person for interviews, and we do the role plays and the interviews. And then she'd say, "Oh, that's been a long morning for you. Like, let's, I'll take you for lunch. Yeah, let's you and I go for lunch." And what the interviewee didn't realize, or the smart ones did, was that she knew that some people will go, "Oh, cool, this is relaxed now. I'm outside of the process. I can like be my real self and stuff." And it's the lunch that knocked a lot of people out of that job.
Right. And you know what? Another thing, I remember one CEO was telling me how they had a woman who went through about 5 different interviews
Mhm.
and they hired her. At the first office party, she got drunk and she behaved very inappropriately. And you can't ask those questions in an
No.
interview. So guess what? She was made available to industry right after that party.
Right. Exactly. But I mean, the point is, again, like you said, I mean, it's that, we can't always assume, common sense or etiquette in these situations. And I think the other part too is, as you said, now if we're going to be communicating with each other and with employees and all of that kind of stuff, and we're going to be doing a lot of it virtually, I think that's another place where etiquette and manners really need to play an important part. Because if I'm on a call with you now and you keep seeing me do this, like,
Don't you dare.
yeah, right, exactly.
And you know what? I was in a board meeting the other day and there were about 35 people in the meeting. Do you know that nobody turned their cameras on? And that made it very awkward for me because I
Mhm.
believe in having
Yeah,
my camera on. How else does somebody know if you're really participating? And then, of course, when the CEO called on different people, they weren't all, pressing the button to unmute themselves quickly. He couldn't tell if they were there or not.
right. And yeah, just flip that on its head for a second and just think about that in a pre-virtual world, right? Can you imagine saying, "Hey, Frumi, I'm going to come in. We're going to meet, but you're going to meet in that. You're going to go and sit in that meeting room over there, and I'm going to sit in this one. I'm going to call you from there. I'm not actually because I don't want you to see me." and I want to be playing on my phone and all of that. I mean, the stuff that you would never do in front. Well, some people do now, unfortunately, but generally back in the day, you wouldn't have done these things. But why is it okay for you to do them now?
It isn't. It's just, I think it's a question of really understanding what etiquette is all about, and how you either edify your brand or diminish it.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, the one thing I will tell you is I have two monitors. So when I am looking at this monitor because somebody's sharing a slide,
Sure.
I actually say I have two monitors. So if I'm looking there, it's because I'm looking at your slides. And I think it's important to say that because I don't want somebody to think I'm not paying attention.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the other thing somebody mentioned the other day is to say, if you see me looking down like this, it's literally because I'm taking some notes here. I want to take some notes on what you're saying, rather than you just doing that and assuming they understand it. And then they think, oh, right, so you've got your phone down there, you're watching the football. I don't know what you're doing.
Exactly. So how do you think other companies are making sure they retain and engage their employees?
I think a lot of it, what you just went back to, what you said about, I think the intentionality piece is huge. I think and the communication piece and figuring out how to communicate effectively with people who like to consume information differently. But I think it all comes back to honestly, for me, is to actually identifying and addressing the issue and saying, okay, we need to be deliberate about how do we retain people, how do we motivate people, and frankly, how do we help people find new careers if they're not performing.
So, one of the things I want to share with you is the reason we started the business school was because so many entrepreneurs and leaders don't learn all the practical stuff when they're in school.
Yeah.
So you learn how to be an entrepreneur, but that doesn't mean you necessarily know about strategy or execution or cash management or any of those things. So I guess my focus is really to engage with companies and let them know that one way to keep your people is to educate them, give them opportunities for education, because everybody wants to leave a job better than when they arrived.
Mm-hmm.
So how are you going to do that for them? And in the old days, you would send them through an MBA program, but now they're too expensive. So now what they do is they give people or reimburse them for taking a course. But if they leave, they have to pay the money back.
Right.
So it kind of defeats things. And
Yeah, so that's kind of handcuffs.
yes, it's handcuffs.
Yeah.
So that's why we started the school, and we actually started it during the pandemic because because people started to realize that they could get education online.
Yeah.
Not just in the original online schools, but
Yeah.
simply.
And I think the other part for me is the whole idea of coaching and mentoring, right? I mean, I think that if you can put a coaching or mentoring program in place in your organization, and it doesn't, I mean, that sounds very grand. It doesn't have to be like that, but just that you have your maybe your more tenured, your more experienced, your more expert people, mentor, buddy up and mentor somebody. And even that small investment, and it only has to be a relatively small investment of time, but it just has to be consistent, can make a massive difference. Because as you said, is like, who doesn't want to learn, right?
Right. I think mentoring programs are really critical. Obviously, not every company can afford to get people coaches, but mentoring doesn't have to be that way. Mentoring is just matching people within an organization with people who need to learn something. It's it's almost a transaction.
Yeah.
I need to learn how to close when you're selling. You're a really good closer. Will you teach me how to close? What does that look like? How often do we meet? Do we meet every week for a month? Do you listen in on some of my conversations?
Mm-hmm.
That's mentoring. And that would engage people and retain them because they will leave better.
Yeah.
But
and
a mentoring program for that.
Yeah, and I think the key there is, no, absolutely, you don't need a formal program, but I mean, the key to that then is the consistency, because there's nothing that it can be very counterproductive if I say, for me, I'm going to do all this for you and I'm going to mentor and I'm going to help you, and then let's put it on our calendar, this weekly session, and then we do the first week, and the second week, oh sorry, something came up, we'll just catch up next week, right? And then next week, oh, can we move it to Friday? And before you know it, you're far from mentoring you. I'm actually just sending the message that I don't really care about this isn't important to me, and therefore you're not important to me.
Yes, and you know what, that's key, because people really have to know that they matter. I think in a way, more than getting bonuses or more than boosting your salary, people want to feel that they're contributing, and they want to feel that they matter and that their managers care, because they always say that people leave managers, they don't leave companies.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. And what you were saying earlier, actually, it's interesting. I was talking to somebody the last week who does a lot of work with companies who hire hourly people, right? So franchises, restaurants, all of that kind of thing. And you would think, okay, that's how do you motivate somebody who's maybe just taking that job because they need to make some cash or whatever, turnover is high, and that. One of the things was some of the people who ran like franchises and stuff, they would say to some of their employees, do you want to learn about the business? I'll teach you. I will teach you about and suddenly you have these hourly people who are now highly motivated, because that's not what they want to do for the rest of their lives, but they want to learn, they want to go on and do things, but they're now learning business skills from the franchise owner.
So I think it doesn't matter what kind of company you're in. I think when you have employees, it's really important to understand what motivates them, to ask them. Often when people aren't performing, what I ask is it a question of motivation or ability? Because sometimes people don't have the ability, and it's okay if they just say, I don't know how to do that, I'd like to learn. Or it's motivation. So which is it? And that you need to have those conversations.
Yeah. And I think the other thing about, that certainly came out of COVID, and that is starting to maybe be a little bit more understanding and flexible around people's circumstances, because sometimes it's as simple as if somebody works remotely and they can drop their kids off at school at whatever time of the morning, and they can pick them up in the afternoon, and they still do the work and they still put in the hours, and for you to be like okay and flexible, that is very motivating. If you say, let's talk about what work configuration works best for you, and I'll see whether it works for us, and we'll come to some kind of compromise. But that's a lot better than people having to say, oh, is it okay, I'm just going to pop out to grab my kids, kind of fearing what the reaction would be. It's much better that you say, okay, what's the optimum configuration for your job right now, both for you and for us?
So that always comes back to setting expectations right from the beginning. I remember years ago, before Zoom, before any of these video conferencing tools, just having a conference call. I remember there was a marketing team I was working with that was very dispersed. And the lead marketing person said, how do I know if people are working? How do I know if they're working from 9 to 5? And my answer was, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that you set the expectation. They know exactly what they need to perform to, what success looks like for them. And if they work 6 hours or 10 hours, what's the difference?
Yeah, no.
The job in 6, good for them.
Yeah. And the other part of that too, for me, is that, they could be sitting in the office for 8 hours a day and doing nothing. I mean, it's, they could be daydreaming, they could be doing other stuff. They not necessarily, just because they're physically present doesn't mean they're actually present.
That's right. So how do we keep them present? We share the values, as we said. We find out what motivates them. We give them more education. I think it's easy. You just have to do it, right?
And your point is a really good one too, around like if they're delivering and they're meeting and they're doing exactly what they, what you want them to do, and they're meeting, your expectations for the work. If they're getting it done and faster and quicker, and they can leave early or whatever, instead, I mean, we've kind of grown up in this thing where we would go, oh, I need to give them more work. Right. Instead of like recognizing that, wow, good for them that they're able to fulfill the role and some without needing to spend all the hours.
And of course, there's so much more talk about wellness in the workplace. So it's important not to create a an environment where everybody has to be a workaholic.
Yeah, and that I think is if there's one thing I think culturally, because it's spread across the world now, it's not just the US, but it was certainly when I first came to the US 25 or 26 years ago. Um, let's face it, the biggest badge of honor you could have is being stressed, overworked, working all the hours, working late, doing all of that. It was like, that's what, that was a badge of honor because that showed how much you cared. And that's what people, I mean, you even see in job descriptions, that's what people are looking for. I want somebody who's going to go above and beyond, blah, 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 blah. And we have to get away from that, because that doesn't help our health. It doesn't really help our work product at the end of the day. And it doesn't, and it drives people away.
Exactly.
So listen, Frumi, as usual, this has been a great conversation. All of Frumi's information is going to be below this video. But before we go, please do tell people a little bit more about you and what you do.
So I have what I call a portfolio career, which is a little different. It means I do several things. Sometimes I step in as an interim CEO if the CEO wants to go to Tuscany for a month and leave a face in charge, play all day and talk to me in the evening. Or sometimes somebody's ill and they need someone to step in, or generational transfers. You have a kid and you're not quite sure if they can handle it yet, so you bring in someone for the sidecar. That would be me. And when I'm not doing that, I have my school. And this is my passion project. And one of the things I love is we offer free courses to veterans and their spouses. This is in honor of my dad. And that's what I do. I love what I do. It's my passion project.
Excellent. When I go, as I said, go check it out. It'll all be below this video. And, if you're a military or a military family, there you go. You get free education. I mean, and Frumi does fantastic work. So I would encourage you to go check it out. Well, listen, thanks again for your insights. Thank you for watching and listening. And I will see you all again very soon. Thank you.